All right, Meat Mafia, we are officially 80 episodes into the Meat Mafia podcast. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your guys' support. On today's episode, we had on Denell Randall. In our conversation with Denell, we talked all about women's health. And for us, this was a huge learning experience. I don't think we fully appreciated some of the differences between women's health and men's health. And some of the things we talked about were eating for proper cycling. So at different times of the month, women should be eating different foods. That's not something that we knew really anything about. And with conversation with some of the women in my life, this is actually something that a lot of women don't know about. We talked about optimal nutrition for women, how men and women should better understand each other's health and their differences. And all in all, I think this was a fantastic conversation with Denell. If you're a guy, I think you'll get a lot out of it. You'll see and probably be surprised by some of the simplicity of the questions we asked. But honestly, I think it's healthy to have these types of conversations. And for men, we really don't have much of a clue around women's health at all. So getting a basic understanding of that, I think, is a great step in the right direction. So without further ado, Denell Randall. We get questions all the time about how to incorporate beef liver into a healthy, balanced diet. The questions are usually around how to source high-quality beef liver, how to overcome the taste of liver, and how to travel and still be able to include beef liver into your diet. That's why we love Optimal Carnivore, which provides beef liver supplements as well as an organ complex for people to incorporate beef liver without the taste and with the convenience of just being able to pack it into a bag and toss it into your mouth when you're ready for your supplements. Beef liver is an important part of my diet because it provides me with the B12, copper, vitamin A that you can't really get from any other food groups. Beef liver is truly nature's vitamin, and being able to incorporate it in such an easy form, such as this supplement, makes it that much better. Go check out Optimal Carnivore and let us know what you think. All right, Denell Randall, welcome to the Meat Mafia podcast. We're so excited to have you.
I'm stoked to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me and to be a part of your community.
Did you ever think you were going to find yourself on a podcast titled The Meat Mafia?
No, this is very different for my my branch of the health world, being in women's reproductive health, and I'm a women's integrative health coach. No, the Meat Mafia is definitely not something I thought I'd be a part of, but it just makes sense. As I said before we started recording, we have to start to bridge these gaps between the health and lifestyle medicine worlds. We're all trying to do the same thing here.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're really excited for this. We were saying before we hit record, we both have a great personal friend, Carmen Studer and Carlisle Studer. They're fantastic. And one of the things we mentioned at Carmen is, like, as we're expanding and growing the number of episodes we're doing, we want to make sure that we're also focusing on awesome female guests that can give us that perspective into female health, especially as men. So you came highly recommended by her. We know that you have an amazing story on how you healed your cervix naturally through diet and lifestyle. So I think as a starting point, we'd love to hear you tell your story, and then we'll just take the conversation from there, Denell.
Great. Sounds good. So, my story is very similar to many others in that it was a diagnosis that prompted me to start to actually think about my body in a holistic way. And it actually took things to get really scary for me, like with the possibility of a cancer diagnosis, for me to really be like, okay, it's time to be serious about how I approach being in this human body. So at the age of 19, I went in for a pap smear, which, for those of you who don't know, that's like a female gynecological exam that examines inside of the vaginal canal. Because as women, we don't know if something is wrong in there because we can't see it. Whereas like with male anatomy, everything's on the outside. So you can see if something's up. For us though, we have to have it examined and checked out. And the pap smear examines particularly this part of the female anatomy, which is called the cervix, which I'm happy to go into what that is after I tell my story. But in essence, that exam and the diagnostic tests that they did came back, quote, abnormal. So I was diagnosed with HPV, which is a STI, a sexually transmitted infection. And it's well known that HPV is can lead to cervical cancer, or if it infects other parts of the body, like the throat or, the rectum and anus, it can cause anal cancer or throat cancer. So I was diagnosed with HPV, and I was also diagnosed with what's called cervical dysplasia, which is a really fancy way to say abnormal cells on the cervix. And, abnormal cells is really, again, just a fancy way to say precancer, because cancer in essence is your own body, like the cells of your body, wherever it's showing up, mutating and kind of going haywire. So I was showing signs at the age of 19 of this like precancerous development. And because I was young, and I had literally no idea what any of this meant at the time. They said all these words to me, and I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But they're like, you're young, you'll heal, don't worry about it. We see this all the time. Just live your life. So, I was going to college and I was living the college lifestyle, and I didn't give my reproductive health another thought because my doctors, my practitioners told me I didn't have to. So I didn't. Well, fast forward 4 years, and it started to get worse and worse and worse over those 4 years. And so every time I would go and have a pap smear done, which if something comes back abnormal, they recommend you to go in every 6 months to a year. So I was going in pretty regularly, and, the experience in the gynecologist office is like a whole other conversation that's pretty sometimes and oftentimes horrible for women, just being so exposed and vulnerable. And it's scary to really not be able to see yourself and having, these doctors tell you like there's something wrong here. So, the cervical dysplasia was going up in grade. So it starts at it's called SIN1, which is, it's an acronym for a very fancy medical term, but it goes to grade 1, 2, and 3. And where I started at grade 1, I was all the way up to grade 3. And the next grade was like stage 0 cancer. So I was really like bordering cervical cancer at age 23.
Wow.
So, through that time, they did give me treatment options. There are different options they provided. One was the HPV vaccine, which I'm a very curious and inquisitive person. So I was like, hey, doctors, can you tell me how getting the HPV vaccine will help me if I already have HPV? And they couldn't give me any answer. So I opted out of that. And then the other treatment option they gave me was this procedure called the LEAP, which is an acronym for Loop Electrical Excision Procedure. And essentially they just take this device and cut off the face or a big part of the cervix, which when I talk about the cervix, you'll be like, oh, that's actually really horrible, because it's it's a pleasure center for female anatomy. It's a place that dilates during childbirth. And so cutting off a portion of this can lead to scar tissue, leading women to not be able to give birth naturally, to force cesarean. There's a whole slew of side effects that can happen from this procedure. And I opted out of it because I did some research on it, and I read horror stories and I saw photos online, and I freaked myself out. So because they were going to do this without anesthesia or any numbing, and it's just I just got afraid. Jeez. So lo and behold, I'm at this 4-year mark, and I wasn't listening to my practitioners, my doctors. So they sent me away to a teaching hospital here in my local area, this big teaching hospital with this big fancy OBGYN gynecologist, because then I would listen to her, right? So I have another exam, and I had my 7th colposcopy biopsy done, which for your female listeners, if they've had one of these, they would know what I'm talking about. But in essence, it's they take a snip or a biopsy, they call it a hole punch sometimes, of the face of the cervix, which the face of the cervix equivalent in male anatomy is the head of your penis. So it's even looks the same, just inside of the female anatomy. So think about like having little snips off that portion. So
Sounds torturous.
yeah, and they do this without numbing. It's like, it's crazy. So lo and behold, this doctor looks me dead square in the eyes and it's like, Denell, you refuse the leap, you refuse the vaccine. I'm sorry, there's nothing more we can do for you.
Wow.
And so I literally like walked out of this hospital truly believing I was going to die an early death from cervical cancer. And I was like, like through those 4 years, I had asked my doctors, like, what can I do? How can I help myself? Like, what is something, like, I don't want to just like do nothing, but the only thing they offered me was to take the supplements, folic acid and lysine, and that's it. So after that exam, I went home and I was crying in the shower because I was like distraught that I felt like I'd been thrown under the bus by, my allopathic providers. And something very interesting happened where like it felt like my body kind of came online for the first time, and like I heard my body talk to me being like, Denell, something's wrong. We're going to figure it out. And so for the next 3 years, I just dove headlong into everything health and wellness and natural healing and lifestyle. And I went back and got my master's in integrative health because I was just like, I just wanted to know, how does the body heal? How does the body regenerate? I was reading about stories of people who had, stage 3 or 4 cancer, like metastasized cancer, where they would have spontaneous healings overnight. And I would like read these stories and be like, there's nothing different from these people than me. Like, I can do this. I can do this. And so, I changed everything about my life. I changed everything with my lifestyle, what I ate, how I treated my body, the friends I hung out with, what I was doing with my daily habits. And lo and behold, 7 years after that initial diagnosis and 3 years after really putting a stake in the ground that I was going to do this, I had a pap smear on like a Thursday afternoon. And that Saturday morning, my doctor called me, and like doctors don't call you normally. They just like message you in the online messaging portal, But she called me. She's like, Denell, I got your results back yesterday, Friday afternoon. She's like, I couldn't wait to tell you. And in my mind, I was like, oh my God, I have cancer. Oh crap. But she's like, Denell, your cervix is perfectly healed. Like it's in fact like shows no remnants of cervical dysplasia. HPV has basically like evaporated from your body. Like we can't eat, there's like no signs of it. And she's like, you did it, like you healed. And she asked me, she's like, how did you do this? And I just was so excited. And I felt like the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulders. Cause through 7 years, I endured a lot of medical bullying. I was shamed in the gynecologist office. I had one doctor tell me, you just had too much sex. That's why this is happening to you. It was, there's like a lot of things that happen that just like make you want to give up. So, once I realized though, that I had like kind of figured things out for this particular issue for women, I started to get like pretty angry, honestly. I was like, why did I have to endure this? Why couldn't these people whom I had entrusted, why couldn't they provide this information for me? Like, why was it so like mysterious? So that's when I decided to really spread this information. And I started my business, which is called Cervical Wellness. And I'm really here as a voice to share with women that there is another way, that your body can heal, that the body wants to be well. We just have to figure out what it's trying to tell us through these diagnoses or symptoms. And so here I am today, 7 years after, that phone call, and, it's never come back. I've never had another issue, and feeling healthier than ever.
That story is incredible. And I feel like it points to a few things a few themes that we talk about a lot, but one of them is really taking health into your own hands. And I'm curious if you ever think about where you would be if you weren't so inquisitive, if you didn't want to find out the answers for yourself, and if you had just relied on the guidance that you were given to just get the HPV shot and kind of just, follow their blind faith, because they didn't even know why they were giving you that recommendation. So I'm curious, do you ever like think like, where would you be if you had followed that other path?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I feel like I honestly have no idea, because this experience really catalyzed so much in my life. And I mean, I probably would just be living life unconscious and unaware. And, I have chronic disease in my family, chronic preventative disease like diabetes and gout and these sorts of things. And like, that's in my genetics. So I might have just like followed down that path. And I feel like I've really rewritten the story for my genes, at least within my family, by choosing this other way. But it is kind of scary to think what would have happened if I didn't.
And you were so young to experience this. I think you said you were 19 when you first got diagnosed and you were 26 when you got the all clear signal. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Got it. And so just to mirror your doctor's questions, what things did you do that you found to be so helpful at healing this?
Yeah, I mean, it's so multifaceted. It's, starting from the physical level of really looking at my diet, which I know you gentlemen are all about, but, I was eating a very high, carbohydrate diet in the forms of like pizza and bread and pasta and like staying out late at night all the time, drinking beer. And like, not that beer is bad, but like for my body, it didn't work well. I drank a lot of alcohol at that time, actually. So I had to go through a whole recovery around my alcohol use was one thing I needed to do. Also looking at just even the simple things of like, am I drinking water? I realized I didn't like drink good water, Also moving my body more. Like when I was younger, I would play soccer and whatnot, but I just like exercise wasn't really a thing I did. And so like on a physical level, just really taking care of like the animal body, just like what does my body need beyond what my mind wants, like of course my mind wants to like stay out and party. Like I'm an extrovert. I love hanging out with people and doing that, but like I need sleep. I need to make sure like I like eat good food, like these sorts of things. So, a big thing I work with my clients is just cooking. Like that's a big thing, is like a lot of my clients are like, I don't know how to cook. I'm like, okay, well, we need to work on that. So like not relying on restaurant or takeout or even like Uber Eats, like how can we choose the ingredients and cook them in a good way, or like prepare them in a good way for our body. But then like, I think one of the major pieces for me, and I'm sure many of your female listeners can relate to this, is coming back into relationship with my female body. Because as women, we are taught growing up to have very confused ideas about our female body, in particular, like our pelvic place, like sexuality, like fertility, like, have like be on birth control and have lots of sex. But if you have lots of sex, you're kind of a slut. But if like you don't put out, like they're not going to like you. But if you do that, so it's like we just get like so confused, and so many of us become dissociated. And coupled with like sexual trauma or gynecological trauma, or even like reproductive trauma, like women who've had like miscarriages or abortions, like these things lead our mind to just like disconnect from our pelvis, and we just kind of like live up here. That's why many women, I believe, like have a hard time having orgasms, or they like don't know if like where they are in their cycle, and like there's this disconnect. And a big part of my work with women is like bringing our mind and our awareness like back down here, that it's safe to do so. And when we do that, we're confronted with a lot of like density, like the fear, the trauma, the stories, the memories. And I believe that cervical dysplasia, or like even other female reproductive health issues, um, can be deeply supported by just addressing like the negative mindset towards our female body. So those are some of the things that I did. I mean, I could probably speak about like for a whole hour about all the things I changed, but really addressing my life on a physical level, and taking care of like my animal body. That's what I call it, at least, the body in earth, like we need to eat and drink and make sure we're defecating properly and like these sorts of things, and addressing the psycho-emotional component of my relationship with my pelvis and with that region of my body.
Would you say that for a woman, understanding where you are in your cycle and tracking that is like one of the core pillars to making sure that you're optimizing your health overall?
Oh, most definitely. Because unlike in male physiology, like you're pretty linear, like you go through hormonal cycles, and even like the moon might affect how you're feeling, whatnot. But with women, every single week of the month, it's like a different experience. And our physiology and our hormones require different input and output. It's like the week we are on our period is very different for us than the week that we are ovulating or when we're fertile. And so like we even require different nutritional needs during the 4 different weeks, the different phases of our menstrual cycle. Post-menopausal women, like once women stop having their period, that's a little different. Their hormones are more stabilized. But for like premenopausal women, like we really need to be aware about where we are at in our cycle and treat our body accordingly. Like in the days leading up to us starting our period, we cannot do the same things that we think we should be doing. We don't have the same energy. We don't have the same like stamina as, say, when we are fertile and ovulating. It's like it's so dynamic. And so it really made a huge difference in my life to just know that about myself, and to give myself grace. If I want to eat more like carbohydrates right before my period, that's actually a good thing, because my body's actually using more energy because I'm about to start bleeding and having my period, which takes a lot of energy for female physiology. And I think that's important for men to know too. Like my husband, it's been revolutionary for him to learn this, because he's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that women go through kind of this chaos perpetually. I'm like, yes. Every week is a different experience for us, and you just need to kind of ride the wave with us if you want to be in relationship with us. But for women who are on birth control, that doesn't happen. It kind of, birth control actually either mimics the body being pregnant already, or it makes the body think that it's postmenopausal. So it just kind of confuses the body in its entirety, which can have pretty lasting negative consequences in the long run. But I'm glad you asked that question, because the chaos that we women endure with our physiology makes it very important for us to align our lifestyle to the ebbs and flows of our hormonal fluctuations.
What sort of things, like through the course of like the month of your cycle, should both like men and women be aware of? Like maybe starting with like the woman, like what sort of things would you put together from like a dietary perspective or lifestyle perspective to help make those cycles like a little bit more intuitive? And then you kind of like, just because it sounds like, from what you're saying, a lot of people just like aren't even in touch with what's happening on a week-to-week basis. So
yes, totally no clue.
What your tricks are.
Yeah. So, I mean, for a woman, if she is on her period, she should not have any cold foods whatsoever. No ice cream, no ice drinks, not even like salads or raw, and no cold foods. The womb, the uterus, in traditional Chinese medicine is considered an organ of fire. It's like that, like the phrase like bun in the oven when a woman is pregnant is because it's like it's a warm place. And so right before her period, which is called the luteal phase, into the menstrual phase, warmth, having warm foods and like grounding foods. So this is when like red meats, like heavier, dense things, like dense fat. In terms of, I know you're like focused on meat, but for females, we do need some carbohydrates. It is important for our physiology. And so focusing on like root vegetables during these phases, like beets or carrots or potatoes, like things that are densely nutritious that our body can quickly utilize for energy. But after she's done with her period and it goes into the follicular phase, which is the phase when like the ovary prepares to release an egg for potential conception, which is then called the ovulatory phase. That's when like lighter foods can be had, like we don't need that like deeply grounding experience anymore. Like we're like a little more light and a little more free. Like this is when women might want their smoothies or like raw milkshakes, these sorts of things. Like cold foods are okay during this time because like the uterus isn't like at working as like a fire in a way. So also in terms of like movement and exercise, I want to speak to this as well. Like in the luteal phase and menstrual phase, which is when like you can think of it like seasons. So like the menstrual phase is like winter. Okay. The follicular phase is like spring. The ovulatory phase is like summer. And the luteal phase is like fall. So like in fall, winter, we want to be like quieter. We want to do like less strenuous exercise. We don't want to like go on the long run. We don't want to do HIIT. We don't want to, like overexert ourselves. We want to be kinder to our bodies because it's like preparing to do this like pretty hot, like heavy energy experience. Like having a period is very depleting. But in like the spring summer phase of our body, like we can like go on that 5-mile run or like really work out with the weights, these sorts of things. So just like I really think the season metaphor is really helpful. So like what sort of foods would you eat in the fall and winter? What sort of foods do you eat in spring and summer? And like how are you inclined to treat your body during those seasons? That's how women in an optimal way can treat their body through their phase. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, it's a great answer. And then the perspective on nutrition is fascinating because I feel like, particularly in modern society, I hear women will be like, oh, I'm on my period, so I want to have ice cream or like sweets. And it sounds like from your perspective, it's like, no, that's the complete opposite. Number one, it should be these warmer fire foods that are very nutrient dense that are actually going to give your body what it needs.
Yes. Well, from like a mineral perspective, oftentimes women crave chocolate during their period because they're actually deficient in magnesium. And so we can find that magnesium in like red meat or like bison, like we can have it in other ways where it actually replenishes our mineral stores versus just kind of like skating over the top of what our body is needing. So, once I started actually incorporating more densely nutritious animal products into my diet, I have zero cravings for chocolate during my menstrual cycle now, which is kind of like blasphemy as a woman because it's like so typical, I guess, but this is a common story I've heard from many women, is like the more like butter or tallow or like bacon that we like put into our bodies, the less that we've actually wanted the ice cream and the sweets and the whatnot, because we're already nourished and our body isn't looking for that quick fix.
Well, that's a great point, because I think you mentioned before you hit the record button that you'd had a number of clients that were previously plant-based, and they made the transition over animal products. And you said that a lot of their biomarkers improved. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. I mean, one thing I recommend to every single woman that I work with, or every consultation that I have, I'm like, are you taking beef liver in some way? Because it's going to help you. Or like oysters, if you don't, and if you don't want to eat these things, like take them as a capsule, it's just, it changes the game for their body. And it's like, again, going back to like the uterus and just the female physiology of the pelvis, like having ovaries, having an organ that goes through these cycles all the time, it takes so much energy. Like it's incredible how much energy it takes. And I think that women, once they reach menopause, if they haven't been giving their body the nutrition, like the deeply nourishing nutrition that the pelvis needs, when they go into menopause, they have a really hard time, because like changing over from having a menstrual cycle to not also takes a lot of energy. Plus, maybe they've given birth a few times and breastfed, and that's also depleting. And so, women coming into, their 60s and 70s, they're like frail and have osteoporosis and all these other issues, because their body has just been so depleted through all these cycles and changes. And so, with my clients, I mean, I've had some clients who are vegan and they've pushed against me, and I say, look, your body doesn't care about your ideology at all. Like the mind is not of this earth, like body is of earth, like mind is kind of a different thing. And like your mind is telling you one thing, but your body is saying, I need this. And the women who I have worked with who have made those changes, they say it's night and day. In fact, I had one client, I was working with her for 6 months, and she had been vegetarian. So she wasn't vegan, but she was vegetarian for like 8 years. And she sent me a photo of the steak she cooked. And she's like, Denell, I just ate this whole steak in like 3 minutes, because I literally couldn't, just like, it just went down. Like my body just like slurped it up. And I'm like, yes, exactly. This is exactly like what you're needing then. Like eat that steak all the time. So yeah, I know in the women's health field, there's a lot of conversation around, using animal products to nourish our bodies after we've been so depleted for so long with like non-fat and vegan and green smoothies and whatnot. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Are there any tests that you recommend, blood work or maybe mineral testing, that helps kind of persuade those types of clients who are maybe vegetarian that really need to be shown something to start eating like a more animal-based diet?
Right. Well, I think the two that you just mentioned, like the hair mineral test, I have a friend who was mainly vegetarian for a long time. She was doing the medical medium protocol for a while. Do you know who he is, the medical medium? Have you heard of?
No.
Oh, he's really into like celery juice and like eating a lot of cold foods and like berry smoothies and no meat, no fat, these things. But she had a hair mineral test and she called me. She's like, Denell, I'm literally shook right now. Like basically my adrenals aren't working anymore because I'm so depleted. And it's really startling, I think, for women to see these numbers in the hair mineral test in particular, because I feel like a lot of women are like masters of dissociation. We can just like operate in the world and like do our thing and like not feel our body, and we just like take caffeine or just dissociate. Most of my clients have an issue with dissociation. And so like they can't like feel that they are severely depleted. So I know for me, I've had blood tests done and they tell me about my hormones. Like a lot of women are like have way too much estrogen in their body. And that can also be a major issue with minerals and whatnot, because we need to balance it out with progesterone. Um, and so just, yeah, just getting these numbers, it's kind of like you can't lie to yourself anymore, at all.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, yeah, okay, if you're not going to listen to me, but you're paying me for me to tell you these things, like take these tests.
Right. Yeah. The numbers don't lie.
Right.
It kind of reminds me, we were actually talking to one of our friends yesterday. Her and her husband just got pregnant. I think they're due in November, and they're big followers of the Weston A. Price diet. So, ancestral approach to nutrition, a lot of really good dense animal products. And they mentioned that they got pregnant incredibly quickly. And she had mentioned that she had been like almost like preparing her body for years to get pregnant. And that seems like a very foreign concept in modern times. Would you be able to touch on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. Like the preconception idea and like
Exactly.
actually
Yeah. Yes.
preparing the oven to have a bun in it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we live in a culture where women from like starting at like 13, 14, doctors are like, oh, just go on birth control. You're fine. Like, it's okay. Nothing will be wrong with it. But actually, birth control, hormonal birth control is like a grand experiment where they don't actually, it's just coming out now because it's been out long enough. But they had no idea what would happen to female physiology when they like impede these hormones for so long. Coupled with like the standard American diet, coupled with, women trying to act like men and not actually like addressing our rest needs and like the seasonal nature of our body. So, for many women, they go from being on hormonal birth control for 10, 15 years where their body isn't having the hormonal fluctuations. Their body isn't ovulating. And so then they go off it for a couple months and they're like, well, why can't I get pregnant? Well, like the body can, like, I don't want to say it like forgets what to do, but it's like if you put something on mute for long enough, like it might just stay that way. Similar to like SSRIs. So, like antidepressant drugs, if you're on them long enough, like your brain does like it forget isn't the right word, but it like can't produce those neurotransmitters on its own anymore without the drug. So same thing with birth control. Like it's kind of an atrocity what has happened where like women have been told like you can take this and then you can just go off of it and then get pregnant a few months later, but that's a complete lie. So the preconception phase, like really women need to be considering like, okay, how do I get my hormones in check? Because like conception and pregnancy and birth, really it's just like a cacophony, like an orchestra of all different hormones that activate different mechanisms in the body for gestation, for birth to happen, in a good way, in an easeful way. And the way that we as women can do that is like preparing our body to, grow another body. And I think another thing that women need to consider is like, it's okay to have some fat on our body. We like, I will admit I fell into this category for a long time where like I wanted to have like the hard body with like the washboard abs and whatnot. But honestly, like for a healthy woman's body, we need to have a little fat pad in front of our uterus because that's what keeps it warm. It's like we need to keep this area of our body warm, to have like fat on our buttocks and like around our hips. Like these things are actually designed for like the health of our body. So like women wanting to get pregnant, like if we do choose to eat these like deeply nourishing foods, we tend to plump up a little bit, and that's okay. And I think, in the preconception phase, like a big part is, because I'm in this actually myself, I'll just be candid, like I am in a preconception journey because I hope to become a mother soon. And it's been kind of like a mind like issue of like, oh my gosh, I'm like gaining weight and like I'm starting to look different and like I'm softer than I was before. But then to remind myself like, well, when we get pregnant, like we become even bigger and like we get softer and like bodies change. So, I think not only do we need to reclaim our fertility and our cycle and our cyclical nature, recognizing that our hormonal fluctuations and having them fluctuate in a good and healthy way is the precursor to then having healthy hormones during pregnancy. And how we can have that happen is by plumping up a little bit, having fat on our body so that when we do get pregnant, we don't become so depleted. Because I learned actually in a podcast a few weeks ago that during the last trimester, actually like the last 4 weeks of gestation, like 4 weeks before the baby's born, 70% of a woman's copper stored, so all like 70% of the copper in her body gets pushed into the baby. So if she is already depleted in this mineral and all of it gets pushed into the baby, like upon birth and then upon nursing, like her body is just going to collapse. And this happens for a lot of women. Like there's a conversation around like postpartum depression is actually just like severe mineral deficiency.
Wow.
So it's like in preconception, it's important to think about that. It's actually like you're preparing yourself for a 9-month journey and then like another year after postpartum, and if you breastfeed, like even longer. So it's like you're setting yourself up for like a 3-year journey.
Right.
Oh, being a woman's wild.
Really.
The copper one is an interesting point that almost goes back to your point on the beef liver. It's like one of the only bioavailable sources of like a really significant amount of copper. I'm curious what podcast that was.
What was that?
You remember?
So have you heard of the root cause protocol?
Yeah, I'm a huge Morley Robbins fan.
Okay. So it was, there was a podcast, it's called the Mythic Medicine Podcast, and she interviewed a guy on Instagram. His handle's Mineral Shaman, because one of his, have you heard of him before?
No.
Okay, but he talks a lot about how like plant medicines, and particularly like ayahuasca and cannabis and whatnot, can actually really deplete your minerals. So that's why he's called the Mineral Shaman. But he spoke about this. I think I can't pronounce his name. It's like Hajib Jabbar. I think I might have butchered that, but yeah, he's the one that said that. And I was like, whoa.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So what sort of things do guys need to be aware of when it comes to women's health? Like what would be your 101 course for a guy to at least show some like awareness and like acknowledgement of like what women are dealing with on a day-to-day basis?
Yes. Okay. So I'm just going to get real here. Foreplay is not just because we want you to pleasure us for a long time. It's actually like a real physical safety process for the cervix. So I'm going to talk about the cervix real quick here. So the cervix is a part of the uterus. So the organ of the uterus is like shaped like an upside down pear. And the cervix is like the bottom portion of that pear, upside down pear. And there's a part of the cervix that's exposed in the vaginal canal. It's at the very end. It's kind of like a little round mound. So like when you hit the end of like when you're inside of a woman, like you're actually coming into contact with the cervix. So the cervix has a lot of nerves on the face of it. In fact, it's one of the most innervated portions of the female pelvis. So the clitoris has the most nerve endings, but the cervix has the most paired nerve pathways, meaning like major nerves in the body, they bifurcate and then they kind of like terminate on either side of the face of the cervix. So like if you're like peering into the vaginal canal, like you'll be able to see like this round mound, and that's called the face of the cervix. So the cervix is very tender, and it's also delicate. Like the flesh is going through a lot of dynamic processes of like the cells are going through different like regenerative mechanisms right on the face of the cervix. So there's a lot of delicate nature to the face of the cervix. So the female arousal process, what happens is like once like the brain and the body has this understanding like, oh, like something's happening here, there might be penetration, I need to like get cervix out of the way so it's not damaged and we're not like hurt. And also like during ovulation to put the cervix in the right position for conception to occur. So what actually happens is the uterus is considered a floating organ in the body, meaning it's just like suspended in the abdomen by ligaments. That over the course of female arousal, what happens is those ligaments like flex isn't the right word. They like start to move and they pull the uterus up into the body and like pull the cervix up into the vaginal canal, actually making like space in the vaginal canal for whatever's going to penetrate. So when time isn't given for that mechanism to occur and things are just like jammed on up in there, it is really painful. It is like I don't know, you might have heard someone say like, oh, too deep, like too much. That's because cervix is being hit. And for women with cervical dysplasia, these abnormal pap smears, there is actually a history of having that happen too much. And what happens is the cells on the face of the cervix get damaged. And actually HPV, the only way a woman can get infected by HPV is through microabrasions. So like small cuts or like small open wounds within the vaginal canal that lead to the infection. So the first thing I tell all men when they ask me this, I'm like, okay, like the 30 to 40 minutes of like foreplay, this is actually for the safety of her body, the safety of her cervix and her pelvic organs. And you will actually have better sex if you allow this to happen. So that is the first thing I want to say. And this was like when I first started dating my now husband, this was like literally revolutionary because he's like, oh my gosh, so many bells and whistles are going off in my mind and memories. I'm like, yes, like there's a reason we're not just being stingy prudes.
So for men listening, 30 to 40 minutes is optimal.
Yeah, I mean, this can even include like making out or just like, you know, just like giving time for those signals to like happen. And also like different times of the cycle, the cervix sits different places of the vaginal canal. So if she is on her period or just after her period, like there's actually less space in the vaginal canal because cervix moves up when ovulation occurs because it's like, I'm open and ready for, you know, semen. So just to be aware of like what is happening inside of her, because this is like the number one complaint of all of my clients is like, I wish he would just know that it's tender in there. And I wish that like he would believe me when I said like, oh, it hurts. Like, we have a little more time, or I'm not ready. It's not that we're trying to hold off because we want it too. We're not ready in 30 seconds, you know. Right. Go ahead.
Does that like intuition get disrupted at all by birth control, or like that I guess relationship with like feeling that sort of issue?
Meaning like, does birth control impact that like mechanism happening?
Yeah, mechanism or like cycle awareness.
Yeah, That's actually a really good question. And I don't know like a scientific answer, but from my, like I have heard thousands of stories from women at this point. And like when I remember when I was on birth control, like I didn't think that I had to even be aware of my pelvis at all. It's just like, oh, I'm taking this pill. So I'm just like, I'm done. I don't have to connect there.
Right.
And so I do think that hormonal birth control do lead women to just like checking out from there. And they're probably not aware of it, because there's also like a whole other conversation about like the female pelvis and like the voice and feeling safe to like voice these things, and like, oh, is he going to reject me or like get mad at me, and like codependency and wanting to take care of like your feelings. Like these are all intertwined with the female pelvis, and so it gets very complicated. But the more that a woman can bring her mind here and speak truth of what's happening there, and to have their male partners like receive that, knowing they're not just saying this to hold off, and like for you to like receive that and understand like, oh, okay, like she's actually saying something that's true here. A lot of healing can happen in that way. And from what I have found is like when that sort of communication happens, and you as like the penetrating side listens and like responds to that in a good way, like it changes the dynamic in a very powerful way. And yeah, it can be healing for both parties.
Yeah. So you said step one, I think we interrupted your flow. So you said step one was like the actual, like give it time for the actual cervix to position itself the right way. And then were you going to go, was there a step two as well?
Oh, step
I thought
two.
you said step two or something
Oh,
else.
I don't know. I don't remember if I said steps, but yeah, so give it time. And like, I can't, if you like enter into her and she's like, oh, like, hold on, like, just like stop. You don't have to pull out. You can just like, just stop and hold. And what can happen is as her muscles in her pelvis, and like, because the vaginal canal has a lot of muscles in there. I mean, you've heard of like the Thai women that can like shoot ping pong balls out, there's like a lot of dexterity that can happen there. So, oftentimes when there's any sort of like, ooh, pain or like, ooh, that doesn't feel good, like all of those muscles clam up. Literally, it's like a clam that shuts down. So if you just kind of like sit and hold there and just like breathe and like control your urge and like let her just kind of open up and soften. You can also encourage her, if she doesn't know, or for the women listening, if you open up and release your jaw and like relax your throat, that actually corresponds to the vaginal canal as well. And like relaxing and opening the pelvis, because when we clam up, that stops that upward movement. Everything just kind of like freezes. So that's why like then kissing is really good, or like you can even just like touch her neck. That like stimulates the body to like, oh, okay, I can relax here, which means I can relax down there, and then things open up. And then step 3 is just like follow the cues of her body. And my guess then is by then like we're good to go, open for business. Yeah, if you have any more questions about that, I'm happy to go into it, but yeah. I'm really happy we're talking about this, because this is what needs to be talked about.
Yeah, these are topics that I don't know why, like on a lot of podcasting or just, I don't know, with modern society, it's like we don't talk about things that need to be talked about. And it's like, I think one night stands for a lot of people are so uncomfortable because it's like you're not having these conversations, or you're not comfortable with the other person. So the more you can get into situations where you and the other person are very comfortable, you're openly communicating, it's like that's when you're going to have the best physical and spiritual experiences that you could possibly have, I would think, right?
Yes, because trust is established, like for women, like it is like sex is a big deal. Even if someone's like, oh, it's not a big deal, like the women that I work with who are now in their like early, mid to late 30s, like a lot of the work we do is actually from the ramifications of all like the one night stands they had and like, you know, the emotions around that. So yeah, I'm glad that you named that, because I do think we need to have more of these conversations, and like men and women together, you know, it's not like just women talking about this or just men, but like having this sort of dialogue, I think is important.
Do you ever do any sort of coaching along those lines of like men and women together, or is that something that you hear of happening more? Because, you know, I do think that like a lot of people would benefit from at least understanding like the you know, females' health side of the equation from the male's perspective, but also like I think people would really be surprised at how little men know about female health. I'll just put it that way.
Right. Well, like I tell my clients this, I'm like, if you don't know this, like imagine how little your partner knows. So I always invite them to share everything with their partner, boyfriend, husband, whomever. But I don't do any coaching in this realm. However, I will say one time I did give a workshop at a local university here, and thinking that what did I call it? It's like the sex ed we never received, like the female sexual experience. That's what I called it. And I thought like women were going to show up. It was all men. It was all men who showed up. I was like, these are all like college age men showing up to learn about this. And they were just like jaw dropped, you know, like learning about these things. And they're like scribbling down notes and stuff. It was really sweet.
Most studious they've ever been, probably, right? Is that your class?
Yeah, it was really awesome. So, you know, I do think that, you know, that you just say this, there is like a need for this sort of thing. But hopefully this conversation will give people a primer to like have these conversations in their relationships.
Do you think another table stake for men is to just understand where your woman is just in her cycle, like you touched on before?
Yes, I know so. In fact, my husband has requested me to put my phases of my cycle in, we have like a shared Google Calendar. And he's like, tell me when this is happening, you know, because, you know, like certain phases, maybe I'm a little more crabby. Maybe like I'm not as receptive. And usually it's like right before my period, I'm just like, don't touch me, you know? And like, if he doesn't know this is where I'm at in my cycle, he'll be like, what? Like, is it me? Like, what's going on? Are you mad at me? Like, what's going on? So I think that for men to be open to hear these things, like I've known, like in the past, maybe these days it's different, or maybe it's just my age, like men seem to be more open, but like men didn't want to hear that their girlfriend was on their period, you know, it was just like, ooh, don't tell me that. But I think just to have awareness about the season that she's in, will give you an understanding like, oh, if she is like just after her period and like, okay, she just finishes her period, and then like suddenly a week later, she's like really wanting a lot of sex, it's because she's ovulating. And that's like where the body's like, partay, like I want it all, you know, that's when the physiology wants to conceive. So obviously like hormones are raging, but then suddenly a week later she doesn't want a lot of sex, and you're like, what happened? It's because like the hormones have changed and she's like heading towards her period. So yeah, I think for men to just to have this in their awareness that literally, okay, Sunday through this Saturday she might be this way, but then the next week it might be very different.
Yeah.
And to also like, if you plan like a romantic getaway or something, like if you're aware of where she's at in her cycle, you can like plan it so she's in a more receptive place. That's been another revolutionary thing, is like, where are you at in your cycle? Okay, like we're not going to go on a romantic getaway here because you're just want to be in your sweats and like Netflix. Whereas if we do it here, like you might feel a little more sexy and want to, you know, have more fun.
Right.
So I think that could be really good for some couples.
And that would like be spring or summer season to try and do a trip like that.
Yeah. In the summer season though, beware, like because she's ovulating, that you do, unless you want to try to get pregnant, you know, use some sort of barrier or pull out or something because she's ovulating.
In terms of female contraceptions, are all of them created equal in terms of how they're going to affect? Because I know you said like birth control affects your cycle a bit and kind of like smooths it out in a sense. Are all the other ones like IUDs and things like that, do those have a similar effect?
Yes. So again, it either like these like IUDs, the Nuva ring, the patch, the shot, the pill, all of these either mimic you being pregnant, mimic or make your body think it's in menopause. And actually with the IUDs, like the copper IUDs, oftentimes you can get pregnant, but it just forces you to miscarry because there's something lodged in the uterus. And I've actually known many women to get pregnant with the copper IUD. A hormonal IUD is different because there's something in the uterus and it's pumping out hormones. So, with my clients who are wanting contraception, I actually recommend the diaphragm. And I know that's kind of like old school, like, whoa, that's like 1950s. But the thing with the diaphragm is like, I would recommend doing it with like someone you are in, like, it's not like a one night stand thing because it does expose you to STIs. Like, unfortunately, condoms are the only thing to use to like really protect you from like pregnancy and, STIs or STDs. But if you are in a relationship and like, you're not like cross-pollinating like infections, like a diaphragm, basically what the diaphragm does is it's in the vaginal canal and it just covers. So if this is like the cervix at the end of the vaginal canal, it just kind of covers the face so that if you ejaculate inside of it, like it can't go into the cervical canal, which that's how conception occurs, is like you ejaculate inside and there's like a hole in the face of the cervix and the semen go up in there and into the uterus and like, inseminate an egg. So what a diaphragm does is you do use spermicide, which some women are like, oh, I don't want spermicide inside me. I'm like, okay, well, like there's very limited options unless you want to use condoms. But with the diaphragm, you can at least still have the experience of like feeling each other, because I'm just going to admit, like, I don't like the feeling of condoms. It's kind of weird. It's like a latex toy. It's like, this is not why I'm doing this. Like, I just use a dildo. So that was kind of like brash, but, so like, I always recommend a diaphragm, and you could like we can buy them online and there's different sizes depending on like, because each woman's pelvis is like different. So the diaphragm, or there's like, what is it called? There's like a cup you can buy. It's called a cervical cap, where it's like, it's smaller than a diaphragm and it just kind of like suctions on to the face of the cervix. Whereas the diaphragm is kind of like an open umbrella that like, just like goes over it. So that's what I recommend to my clients.
Got it.
Yeah.
Are you pretty much blanket telling your clients to get off of birth control if they're on it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not because I don't want them to not get pregnant, but because of like the severe impact it can have on their physiology. I mean, like depression and like just there's just so many issues that can happen. Another thing about hormonal birth control, which is finally being talked about, is that it actually confuses female physiology, where we don't like we're not able to smell male hormones in the same way. And so, like our pheromones, like it attracts people that are like good for you in a way, like your body, like your genetics and their genetics with the pheromones, like you become attracted to each other. But with birth control, that actually confuses the whole system. So it actually leads women to be attracted to men that actually aren't good genetically for them, which I thought was very interesting. Wow. So it kind of like changes that that evolutionary mechanism.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
For any women that are listening to this, that are interested in maybe learning more about some of the topics that we covered, are there any go-to books that you read that really changed your perspective that you like to give to clients or recommend to clients?
Yeah, so the one that really got me on this track, before I went to grad school and learned a whole bunch, there's this one called Taking Charge of Your Fertility. It's by a woman named Toni Weschler, Toni Weschler, Weschler. This is like an incredible book for women just to learn about their cycle. It's like taking charge of your fertility, and it's a how-to also on how to track your fertility using temperature and using fertility signs like cervical fluid, cervical position. And then the other book that I recommend, which I think is kind of like this amazing women's health Bible, is called Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom by Dr. Christian Northrup. And this book really addresses a whole slew of women's health topics from, it goes over like breast and vagina and like uterus and cervix, but it also goes into different diagnoses like PCOS or uterine fibroids or infertility or all sorts. And it's a really thick book. You don't have to read it all, go to the places that call to you, but Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom is a book I always buy my clients because it's just it changes the way women think about their body. And as I mentioned at the beginning, for many women, healing their pelvis and even just healing their relationship to their body is about reestablishing a loving relationship with their female organs. And that book is like gold.
That's awesome. What's the best way for people to get into touch with your work or any writing that you're doing online?
Yeah, so my website is cervicalwellness.com. And, you go there and you could see all of my offerings. For the women who do have abnormal pap smears, I actually have a published book. It's called Informed, Aware, Empowered, a self-guided journey to clear paps. But in terms of social media, I'm pretty active on specifically Instagram. My handle is @Cervical Wellness. But I would say my website, people go there and you could see I have courses and different pieces of content. I have a blog. I have a lot there. So that's where I would point people to.
Perfect. Yeah, well, we'll make sure to link to all that information in the show notes, but this has been such a good conversation. I feel like we've both learned so much, and I have a feeling that a lot of our listeners are going to as well, male and female. Yeah. We would honestly love to have a part 2 with you anytime. We welcome you back. That would be fantastic. But just really appreciate all the work that you're doing and just getting this really important message out to the universe, because we definitely need it.
Great. Well, thank you for listening and receiving and your questions. Yes, I'm so happy to be able to share this with your male listeners.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Denell. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Denell.